On today's Locked On Nuggets podcast, I'm going to walk you through my notebook notes on the Denver Nuggets loss, nail-biter loss to the Sacramento Kings, the second night of a back-to-back, both in Sacramento. I've got a full notebook of notes, including thoughts on Bones Hyland, who I thought had a very interesting game with a lot of positives. Zeke Nnaji, who had an interesting game. Michael Porter, up and down game. Going to get to all of that and more on today's edition of Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for listening to Locked On Nuggets and making it your first listen each and every other day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I mentioned I used to do these all the time. People that have been listening to Locked On for a long time remember the notebook pods. They used to come after every single game. We changed the format, obviously, with Matt Moore. He's on vacation this week. Next week, I'm going to be on vacation, taking the week off. Going to be gone from DNVR and Locked On for a whole week. Kind of a reset before we get ready for the second half of the NBA season. But Matt Moore's off right now, so I'm going to be walking you through the notebook notes, detailed notes on this last game. And I'm excited for it because I actually thought there was a lot of interesting things. If I can adjust here a little bit. Somebody keeps saying Rockies. It shouldn't say Rockies. This is, man, how do I have the Rockies thing up? That's what they're telling me. Running this as a one-person thing is always tough. There we go. Look at that. I got it. Paul Holden, Adam Mattes. There we go. It's hard when you're just one person. On today's show, though, I got a lot of notes from the notebook that I think are going to be really interesting. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. The Nuggets, second night of a back-to-back against the same team. These games are always interesting because they really do become like mini playoff games where you see the different adjustments teams make. That being said, Mike Braun, who I think is a good game-to-game adjustment guy, he's out. You've got Jordi Fernandez, who's a rookie coach, and I'm sure you're still talking to Mike Braun, and your coaching staff's still doing this. But in game, Jordi Fernandez basically getting his feet wet as a head coach, and also interesting because he knows the Nuggets very well. He knows Jokic very well. Those guys were friends, when they were in town or when Jordi was in Denver. So I thought it provided an interesting opportunity for the Kings to try some things out and say, okay, can they make it hard on you? And the first thing is, my first note is that in every game, the Nuggets go to the post. Almost every single time, they'll go to the post early because you want to get a read on what teams are trying to do. And Jordi, for the first 2, 3, 4 minutes of this game, they were not sending a double team. So Nuggets run to the post, first play, get it to Jokic. He takes some dribbles, and he's just like, are they doubling? Is it a double once I dribble? Like, is the double coming? They played him straight up. He gets an easy bucket over Sabonis. And for a couple plays, you're testing that out, and they're not sending the double. But they did adjust, and for a majority of the game, they started bringing the hard double. So this is just an example of a coach, and I think a lot of teams do this where they mix up coverages, but this was the most I've seen it where it was like, we're going to show this for 2 or 3 possessions, and then we're going to switch it up just to not show our hand, probably because Jordi knows in coaching meetings in Denver, they probably say, let's go to the post early to read what their coverage is and take our notes. Like, the rhythm of how Michael Malone works. This is not a surprise, but again, just in my notebook, Zeke Naji is really, really good at moving his feet and shadowing one-on-one. There's going to be a lot of talk on Zeke Naji today, some good and bad. The good, and probably the best part about Zeke Naji, is that he is just so mobile defensively in one-on-one situations. I think his body and like his ability is well above the way he thinks and feels the game. He is maybe... We all think of Michael Porter as this player that is like insanely skilled, but maybe doesn't like basketball IQ a little bit lower. Zeke Naji, he's obviously not as skilled as Michael Porter is, but I think his fill is several. Now that we've had a couple games to watch him, I think his reaction speed, I shouldn't even call it feel, although feel does factor into this. I think it's more the way he thinks and reacts to the game is well below even a Michael Porter. Like the more I watch him, he does a lot of good things, and I still think he should play. But I understand why Malone is probably hesitant to play him, is that he really has a lot of education ahead of him, to become a rotation piece, especially a playoff rotation piece. But at the same time, I don't want to bury a guy for having bad feel when he's been on the shelf all year. But it is a huge note for me, and I'm going to have an episode of the list out either tonight or tomorrow up on thednvr.com with video clips. It's going to highlight a couple key sequences defensively where he kind of got lost, and I'll talk about some of these a little bit later. But one-on-one, moving his feet, his ability to close out and control and just shadow guys was very impressive. And this was a game that featured some really tough matchups. He wasn't 100% on this, but De'Aaron Fox, times he'd get switched out onto him. Trey Lyles would try him. You'd have Malik Monk, who's really quick and slippery, would try him. And I thought he did a good job of just kind of forcing him into the toughest possible shots. KCP has to lead the NBA in illegal screen fouls drawn. And this is a skill. Like, I know this sounds funny. I actually have somebody at Second Spectrum I reached out to. They're on vacation this week. I want to get the data. But I would not be surprised if he was in the 95th percentile among players drawing fouls on screens. And he's great at navigating screens. So maybe it's not a skill about drawing them. Maybe it's more of he's so good at navigating them that players step out of position to foul him because he's so hard to screen. Probably a little bit of both. But he seems to, I don't think he flops. But when a guy moves a hip or puts an arm out or something like that, he does a good job of accentuating it. I don't think it's like a guy didn't set an illegal screen and then he flops. It's just that when they do, he's really good at showing the ref, hey, this is something that happened. And that's a really, really big skill to have when you're a screen navigator. Also, KCP, I thought he did a really nice job in this game. You lose Murray. You lose Bruce Brown, who's a secondary playmaker. You lose Aaron Gordon, who's even like a tertiary playmaker. I thought KCP stepped into the secondary playmaker role in really, really nicely in this one. He had some great pocket passes to Jokic and just some good reads, not complex reads, but basic reads. And I'll have this on the list. They had a play where you have Michael Porter and Bones Hyland on the court. And if you're able to use those guys off ball as floor spacers every now and then, one, it saves your point guard's legs. We know later on this will be Jamal Murray. Getting him to be off ball a little bit and run into actions is always nice as a change of pace. But KCP, I thought, did a really good job of being the lead ball handler in spots and making the right pick and roll pass, not just coming off and hitting a screen or hitting a jumper, but okay, defense steps up, let me draw him out and then make the pass. And I was like, hey, that's really good stuff for a guy that is probably your, third or fourth ball handler in any given combination of players. KCP remains in my opinion, center bullseye fit for this Denver Nuggets team. I think it's also, we talk about it a lot. Michael Porter, 6'10", 6'11". It's underrated how valuable he is as a shooter on closeouts because Kevin Huerter's tall as well. And when the Kings started sending the double team, one of the best things you could do, they were sending it from one pass away and then trying to count on their rotations on the backside. Well, when Porter was that guy, and Porter actually, by the way, underrated in how well he reads the spacing off ball off of Jokic, but he would space so that his guy had to come, one pass away and help. And then that rotation, his gravity is such that if you close out all the way to his space, he still can comfortably go over you. And I have a great clip of him making his first three of the night off of a Jokic post entry. A great three where Huerter closed out successfully toe to toe, basically chest to chest, but he closed out hands down. And if he's just okay, well, you can't elevate as high as I can unless you start before me. If you start after me, I'll just get up to the top of my jump before you and I'll finish it. And from straight on, that's absolute money. But what I like about that, and here's where Porter's game, I think, can continue to grow. Some of this is just confidence and freedom to do it, but some of it is strength and decision-making. The only way to close out on him is to beat him before the ball arrives or to put a hand up and now you're not in position to recover. Very few players can close out with a hand high and still not get blown by. So I think that Porter, to me, it's so valuable because off of Jokic entry, the whole defense bends. You're going to punish him anyway. But even if teams start to overextend, Porter can get the quick, just one pump fake, one dribble pull up, and it's going to be a really valuable weapon there. There's still so much more to Porter's game that I think Denver can explore. And I don't blame anyone for this. You need to get a steady string of games. But I do see a scenario where Porter even more punishes teams when they try to double Jokic in the post. Jokic is cooking in the open court in this game. It's kind of funny, man. He had all of these coast to coast, and and it might have actually worked against him because Jokic wore down the stretch. This is one of the big notes, especially defensively. I thought Jokic's defense on rewatch stood out almost second most. I'll get to who stood out the most. It might surprise you. But he was going coast to coast and like trying to beat Sabonis down the court, and he was getting layups and fouls and everything else. So he was really cooking in the open court. Christian Braun reads the next rotation defensively as well as anybody on the Nuggets roster. What I mean by that is, you have like your original rotation, maybe you double, and then there's one rotation, but then everybody has to like see the next play, not just the one rotation, but you have to see the next one. Christian Braun always sees that, and he always releases quickly. So it's like as soon as the chain starts moving, he's moving 2-3 steps ahead or on time, as well as anybody, including the veteran players. I went as far as to say this in the group chat with the DNVR guys. I've been higher on Christian Braun than anyone since Summer League, basically, because these types of things, the height, the ability to just play one-on-one defense, but more importantly, or equally as importantly, I should say, the ability to you're going to be a scramble defense when you have Jokic. Like, just inevitably, you're going to have a bunch of guys that rotate on a string. As a rookie, less than halfway through his rookie season, he already is as low mistake in that regard as I think anybody on the Nuggets roster. So to me, he is a guy that projects to be a perfect piece for Denver. And I would go as far as to say, I think he is as good a fit in Denver as he would be anywhere, meaning he is a perfect piece specifically for Denver. He'd be good in a lot of places, but I think specifically for Denver. And it gives me so much confidence in Calvin Booth that this was sort of his first big pick. Wasn't sexy, wasn't a guy that you're like, oh man, this is going to score a bunch of points. But to me, his offense is very solid, but his defense is a 10 out of 10. And he is the type of player where if I envision how can you build a top 10 defense around Jokic, he 100% is a major contributor to that. And I'm excited to see him play more and more. In fact, KCP is a great pit, bullseye. So another one, you got two guys you brought in that to me are like perfect center bullseye type players to build around Jokic. I even think Christian Braun might be KCP's replacement in 2-3 years. Like, he's a rotation piece now, but KCP's 30 years old. He's got the contract for 3 more years. He'll be 32, 33 by the time you're probably moving on from him or re-signing him. I think in that same time period, you'll see Christian Braun sort of surpass him perhaps as a defensive player and might be the guy that 2-3 years from now you extend your window because now you have a replacement behind him. I don't think he's going to be like a super expensive guy. He'll be like KCP. If he projects the way I think he will, he'll be like KCP. And I know people might think, well, that's 2-3 years from now. One, he's a great piece right now. Fits. I think he's going to play a lot of minutes. In fact, I would love to see him at that 3 spot around Denver starters. I hope we see more of that as the season goes on. But 2, I think it's underappreciated by fans how hard it is to find the margins around your stars. If you say that Murray and Jokic are the duo you want for the next 7-8 years, basically the entirety of this era, finding the other pieces to have, as Josh Kroenke would say, the revolving shark's teeth of players that fit that mold. To me, not only do they have a great one right now in KCP, I think they have a great one right behind him in Christian Braun that will extend the window for Denver should things sort of go according to plan and you're able to just kind of move from your core group now to your young group coming up. I couldn't be higher on Christian Braun, and I think he's a perfect fit. Let's see here. What do we have for you today? I want to talk to you guys about Rocket Money, formerly known as Truebill, a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscription, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills all in one place. If you're like me, this is really true. Over the years, you get a credit card and you just sign up for things, Apple Music, whatever, things that are recurring, Netflix, and you just kind of stick to it. And it auto renews and it's nice. And you get an email once a year that says, hey, you renewed. This is great. But sometimes you sign up for stuff and you forget that you did it. And it's like, oh my gosh, what am I still paying for MySpace Plus? Why do I have the premium version of MySpace? I don't even use that thing anymore. Well, this is where Rocket Money can really help you. We'll monitor those things and tell you what you're missing. Stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. Check them out. You can even go to their website and read all about them. They've got a lot of really cool stuff going on. So Rocket Money, check them out. Back here on Locked On Nuggets doing a notebook pod. Thank you for making Locked On Nuggets your first listen every day. Make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today. They've replaced, in some ways, the Locked On NBA. We still do that, but now Locked On NBA, which I host on Thursdays, gets to talk about big picture analysis stuff instead of just running through the day's games. Locked On Sports Today does that for you, where you can get the news from the local reporters every single day. quick order so you can know. It's like almost like ESPN News back in the day for your podcast app. Just cycles through everything quick. So check that out. Locked On Sports Today. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All righty. Continuing to plow through some of these notes here. The Porter quarter with the bench was phenomenal. And I think it was made better by the fact that it happened with the bench unit. I think that there is room for Porter to get more creation opportunities with that second unit, especially when you talk about when we extrapolate the final version of this team. Porter in the first group has been very good at being a low usage player. And as he's getting his shot back, I think he's doing he provides value up whether he's hitting shots or not because he's such a deadly spacer. You have Jokic, you have Murray. Those are your top creators. Porter in that lineup inevitably becomes a low usage guy. When Jokic goes out, and I think inevitably future when Murray goes out, this time when Bones goes out, even when Bones is on the court, he's a good creator. But I think that there's room to say, hey, Porter, let's use you more like a superstar now and let you go off. And I thought in this game, naturally it happened. I mean, you're playing with some really crazy lineups where you've got like Christian Braun and Vlatko Cancar and Davon Reed and DeAndre Jordan. Like you got some lineups out there that are not, Ish Smith is out there, that are not great. Where are we going to go? Where are we going to get our shots? That Porter quarter happened largely because of his ability to make shots, but also create shots for himself in that. So a lot of them were in transition. Denver didn't run an action for him. He just got a rebound, brought it up, and then called his own number. And he was feeling it. But you know what? Porter's a phenomenal scorer, and I actually think that second unit can find opportunities for him to kind of fill in there. This was an uneven game for Michael Porter. His first quarter was phenomenal, and that stretch in particular was just amazing. But he did kind of lose some of his momentum, and I think one of the reasons that Malone is probably slow to say, yes, let's call his number more often, is what happens in quarters 2, 3, and 4. When it doesn't work for him, it often is turnovers, bad shots where he drug himself out of possession, and then it's a 5-on-4 the other way. So I do think there's a learning curve for him that the Nuggets need him to sort of fulfill. But nonetheless, that second unit is doing that already without him being the primary guy. So you might as well, to me, let him kind of like extend him a little bit of a leash there, run some things in the offense that allow for him to ISO. I know that's not Denver's preferred style, but guess what? You call a lot of Jeff Green ISOs. Might be time to call a few Michael Porter ISOs and see what he can do in terms of shot creation. And I think it'll benefit Denver. Ish is really good. Ish Smith comes into the game. I actually thought he had an uneven game. First stint, I thought he was great. Second stint, I thought he was horrible. And not only horrible in a way that was like not very veteran of him, but let's stick to the first part here. He's really good at turning half-step advantages into full-step advantages. I talk about this all the time. The best thing about Jokic is he'll create an advantage almost out of nothing by virtue of his skill set and by virtue of when people try to talk about MVP or best player, they always think about these things as if it was a one-on-one matchup. Like if you were at the YMCA and you saw Jokic versus KD would kill him every time. Like, okay, whatever. That's not basketball. What makes Jokic great is his ability to do the 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 5-on-5 game. And when Jokic creates a half advantage, one way to take advantage of that is by knocking down three-pointers. So you get a half advantage for Michael Porter at the three-point line, drains it. With Ish Smith, what he's good at is if you get a scramble defense, man, he attacks those closeouts so well and then creates full step advantages. Defensively, I don't think it would work, but I'm interested to see. I mean, I would not be afraid to see Ish Smith play with Jokic a little bit more in some low minute, 1-2 minute stints with second units or staggered units because he's just so good at that specific skill. They had a 122 offensive rating in 78 possessions so far this year, plus 16.5 net. That's not very many. It's not even 100 possessions, so it's a especially small sample size to have that Jokic-ish to even talk about it. But at least it's promising. I mean, it's different than if it were terrible. This is a trait that the Nuggets have picked up over the last handful of games. They're fouling entirely too much. Kings were in the bonus early in quarter 1 and in quarter 2. And not just fouls, but off-ball fouls. Like, while you're in the bonus, this is where Chris Paul's the most annoying player on earth is when he gets in the bonus, when his team gets in the bonus, he just hunts fouls. Everything he's doing is just trying to get fouls because he knows it's the easiest way. You get to the line and you shoot. Well, Denver, the Kings weren't even necessarily focused on that, but yeah, Davon Reed holding a guy on a cut off ball, not even a threat to get a basket, and you foul him. Like, those types of things to me, Zeke Nnaji had a couple that you're like, dude, you can't foul in that spot. They're shooting free throws every time you foul. So there were just some plays like that, and it was mostly your younger guys. But those are the types of things that separate vets from great players is there's nothing more valuable than a free throw. It's the number one most valuable shot you can take. And fouling off ball to get free throws is like the biggest way you could shoot yourself in the foot. And Denver's been doing that too much. It doesn't sound like a big deal. Denver did it 3 or 4 times total in this game. That's probably 6, 7 points in a 1-point game. That was all the difference. Bones Hyland is the best on the team at reposting Jokic. I thought Bones Hyland was phenomenal in this game on the offensive end for most of it. For almost most of it. The numbers for themselves, 20 points, 5 rebounds, 11 assists is incredible. Offensive rating when he was on the court, incredible. People, I think, are so, I mean, he's had a bad stretch here. I think people are so focused in on the things that he does poorly that even when he has a very good game like he did last night, and I thought on rewatch it was even better, people lose their minds. And I've seen some people in the chats of all the different shows I do, and even on YouTube and this or that, Reddit, whatever, saying like, "Oh, Adam is way too over the top on Bones." I'm gonna puff my chest out. I am on a heater this year in terms of predictions for the team. Christian Braun, I don't think people remember how low Christian Braun's stock was coming out of Summer League. And I'm watching him going, this guy's a perfect fit. His offense looks good to me. He's just not making shots, but he's doing the right things and he fits in the right spot. Summer League, you're put out of position, and I don't care, like, oh, he didn't handle ball pressure. Well, I don't care. He's not going to be doing that in the NBA level. But his defense to me was incredible. I talked about how he just does stuff. All of that stuff has come to fruition, and I think people have forgotten just how unpopular of an opinion that was, coming into the season. Michael Porter, I've been high on in just terms of like, what's your offense going to look like? Even talking about length and how important that was for this team. And oh my goodness, when you put the long lineups out there, look, it works. I'm on a string of things that I think have been good. Even coming into this year, my prediction for Bones Hyland was that he was going to be the new Will Barton in terms of the player that everyone sort of pins on. It's all his fault. He's the guy he's playing. I even said it's going to be, oh, he's playing selfish. He's doing this. Because by virtue, sometimes when you're in certain roles and in certain combinations, you're going to do that. Now, Bones has had a bad stretch. There's no question about it. 3-week stretch here that he has been really bad. Separating the forest for the trees, though, here, he has an incredible offensive skill set. I actually still think that in year 2, the first half of year 2, he's ahead of where Jamal Murray was as an offensive player, at this stage. He's small. His defense doesn't project to be like Murray was always big and 6'5", and you just think, okay, well, even if you're a bad defender, you have physical attributes that are going to make you good. And Bones doesn't necessarily have that. His defense is a whole other story. I think what he did offensively in this game is completely underrated. And you look at Denver, I think they had like a 137 offensive rating last night. No Murray, no Gordon, no Braun, no Jeff Green. These are top offensive options for Denver most of the time, like guys that can create baskets, finish baskets, whatever. You take all of those guys out, and yet your offense somehow has an above average performance. And when you go back and watch, I thought offensively, first of all, 1 turnover. So it's not like he was making bad reads and turning the ball over. 1 turnover. And also, by the way, 50% shooting, both from the field and the 3-point line. He did an incredible job of getting the ball where it was supposed to go, and in particular to Jokic. I think he's the best on the team at reposts off of Jokic post-ups. When you're big and you get the ball, say the elbow or a little bit extended, and you post up and you take 1 step and you're fighting for position and you gain 2 or 3 steps, oftentimes when you pass the ball out, it's a chance to get another 3 feet of post position. Jokic had a great example of this in the second quarter where he gets a little bit of room, gives it to to Bones. Bones catches it and immediately gets it right back to him. And now Jokic is 3 feet from the basket and he gets a wide open layup. You don't see that from almost any other player that, 1, recognizes it, is willing to do it, but 2, delivers the ball the way that Bones did on that specific play and actually does pretty consistently. He's really good at it, and the Bones-Jokic chemistry as a dance partner on offense has been phenomenal, and I just think it's completely – seeing the criticisms of Bones on Twitter and different things last night, I'll spoiler alert, he was not the player the Kings were attacking in the fourth quarter. So as bad as he has been defensively, and that I'm not trying to – there's room for him to grow, like a lot of room for him to grow, and he has to get there if he's going to be a piece for Denver. Offensively, it's underrated how advanced he is as a playmaker, as a point guard, as a scorer, and as a pick-and-roll partner with Jokic at this stage of his career. And he was great over the last 4 minutes. If you want to go back and rewatch this game, the stretch I would tell you was the last 4 minutes of the half and the first 4 or 5 minutes of the third quarter. Even the closing minutes, obviously, with Jokic, I thought he was great. In the final minutes, offensively. But if you just look at the last 4 minutes of the half and the first 4 minutes of the half, to me, it was like elite 2-man game that he had with Jokic. one of the things with Zeke, I think I'll get to this on the other side. So this was some of the stuff on Bones. Pocket passes, just everything was really, really on point in this one. My prediction. So I was telling you, like, I feel like I'm on a heater here, even predicting the Bones, sort of people turning on him. Is he a part of the team long-term? Like, is he a piece? I just talked about how Christian Braun is the perfect piece. Is Bones the perfect piece? Well, you already have Murray, so I don't know if you need two of them. He's been really good offensively. If he could become a much better defensive player, to me, if these last two games were first he eliminated the bad shots, and then he kind of got his facilitating part back to his game. He's been a very good facilitator, in my opinion, last two games. He's gotten those things back. Those are two big steps in the right direction. The toughest step, and maybe there's 4 or 5 steps for him in this one thing, is to start figuring out the defensive end a lot better, navigating screens, anticipating things. Here's my prediction. I think he can be a lot better than what he is now. Can he be good enough to be a playoff? Like, right now, he's a volatile player in general. His peaks are really, really big. His valleys are really, really low. And in a playoffs, you just can't afford like, oh, we just played 9 good minutes and then Bones came in and like gave up an 8-point lead because he had 3 or 4 mistakes that led to layups. You can't have that. You lose playoff games because of that. Just the way you win playoff games if he makes 2 or 3 threes in a row. But you don't want that volatility from a guy who's not your top 5 or 6 players, which at this moment, Bones is not one of your top 5 or 6 players. The thing is, if he can just become a neutral to slightly below average defensive player, I'm not even trying to say above, but if he can just become a slightly below average defensive player, his offensive upside is so high. Jordan Poole's not a good offensive player. Everybody in Nuggets Nation is terrified of Jordan Poole because what he did to the Nuggets in the playoffs. And by the way, in the regular season last year, he did it to a lot of teams. He is an awful defensive player. If Bones can just be Jordan Poole level defensively, then then he becomes a real weapon that you're not worried about the volatility of him in a lineup. He has to get there. I do think that the amount of change there's been to the second unit has put him behind the 8 ball. I think Malone has done him no favors. Some of this by necessity. Like, this is the hard part about being a point guard in today's NBA as a young point guard, is you're probably playing with a second unit to start, and you're probably getting a lot of variables thrown to you. This is why very few traditional point guards are in the league right now, but very few of them get minutes unless you're on a horrible team and you just get to play through thousands and thousands and thousands of reps. But my prediction is, I think people are going to turn back to Bones. I think people are going to scapegoat him for a lot of things because you just scapegoat shooters and ball handlers when things go wrong. But I think that people are going to start to see the positives of Bones' game a lot more in the coming, 6, 7 weeks, really up from now to the All-Star break. I think you'll see more and more of that. There's still going to be the haters. He's still going to have moments where it's like, what is he doing? But offensively, to me, the more it is clear what he is supposed to be doing, the better he is. The more it's go figure or make something out of nothing, the more it's just extreme volatility. I think the Nuggets are going to find some more consistency in the coming weeks. All right, let me give you a scenario. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. If you become a few too many, and as the evening comes to an end, people start to head out, you think, why call for a ride? I live nearby. I'll just get home. It's no big deal. What are the odds I get pulled over or something worse? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, your total car, or even worse, you kill somebody. Chances are you know somebody that has driven impaired and gotten pulled over, and it can completely wreck your life, or at least, or maybe somebody else's even worse, or at the very least, it can be a major inconvenience for a large part of your life and really derail you. Drive sober or get pulled over. That is the message from the NHTS. All right, final segment here, Locked On Nuggets podcast, notebook pod, going through these. So when I talk about Zeke being slow to anticipate defensively, this is the biggest thing for Zeke, because I do think he provides a lot of value. But right now, if you said he's another guy to me that is like this volatile player that at sometimes you're not getting 100% of his defensive value, because 1 out of every 10 possessions or so, something happens that flips the script on Zeke and he stops computing. Like, he doesn't fully read what's happening. One play in particular I can think of, good defense from the Nuggets, long rebound, unlucky, whatever, tip ball kind of goes around, and the ball goes to half court. At that moment, everybody just needs to match up, right? Like, okay, scrambled play, 8 seconds on the clock or something like that. Everybody match up. it was the ball at half court. It was actually very easy to match up and see where you're supposed to go. Zeke Nnaji like walks to half court to pick up who was his man. I think it was Harrison Barnes, when I think Bones was on Harrison Barnes. And it's like, what are you doing? At that point, just match up, just find a man, ball skill. And he saw it too. Like you see him like walk up and go, oh crap, you're there. Turns, like does a full 360, walks around, like looks. His guy, or what should have been his guy, was, I believe, Herter standing in the corner, and he gets a wide open three. There was another play that was similar to that in transition. De'Aaron Fox late in the game sprints the length of the court so that Michael Porter had to pick him up. Zeke Naji, for some reason, went to trap him, realized that was a bad decision, then tried to recover and be like, okay, where do I go? But without sensing like where the guys are on the court, you should just have a natural sense for this. He kind of like ran the entire length of the court, and De'Aaron Fox blew by Michael Porter and scored. Now, it's a bad play by Porter, but if you ask me, is De'Aaron Fox going to blow by Michael Porter almost every single time? Are you kidding? Like on an island, that's obviously an advantage to the other team. But you should be able to negate that by having good help side. But you can't have good help side when one guy takes 4 seconds or 2 or 3 seconds to read, not what other players would do instinctively, for him to read like, okay, well, what's changed? Where do I go? How can I like make the best of this situation? So to me, Zeke does a great job in controlled scenarios and a really, really bad job in chaos. And maybe it's just minutes and reps. Again, this is similar to Bones in a lot of ways. Sometimes minutes and reps help you to figure those things out. But Zeke, I thought, had a couple crucial plays where he, not knowing where he was supposed to do out of chaos, ended up creating a chain reaction that led to fouls, led to layups and open threes. The second unit in this game was rough. I mean, I talked about how this was going to be a great game for Jokic to play with the second unit, Bones, Hyland, Zeke Naji, and get them going, Christian Braun a little bit. And I thought that happened. But you still arrive with a new second unit, which would traditionally be your third unit. Ish Smith, Christian Braun, Davon Reed, DeAndre Jordan, and Vlatko Cancar. Just a kind of a chaotic lineup to begin with. Cancar hit some big shots. Davon Reed hit some big shots. Christian Braun had some great plays. DeAndre Jordan, I thought, really struggled in this game. This was a rough one from him. He actually, early in the game, called for a lob. Vlatko gave him a pocket pass, and it was a bad pass, but he's like, hey, throw the lob. They proceeded to throw him like 7 lobs, and he didn't catch any of them. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, man, I don't know if a lob is like a good call for you anymore. Like, it doesn't move that quickly or that smoothly. But the guy that was most disappointing of that group was Ish Smith. Good minutes in the first half. In the second half, he kept getting off ball. And it reminds me of when Murray and Bones play together. By the way, Bones not on the court for this one, but when Murray and Bones play together, Murray often goes to the corner and just gets out of the way, and then Bones runs the show. Maybe that's by design. Maybe Murray's trying to not overextend himself in those minutes, so he's playing more of a spot-up corner guy. I don't know. But it was clear to me that in the fourth quarter of this game, the Nuggets needed somebody to just make sure. You didn't need to win the game there. You just couldn't lose it. You couldn't lose any momentum. And Ish Smith was like nowhere to be found for a lot of this. And when he was throwing lobs to DeAndre Jordan that couldn't be finished and making some bad plays. So I thought Ish, you count on a veteran in that moment, especially a floor general, to kind of calm them down. And I don't think he brought it in that second quarter. And then, of course, Malone waited a little bit too long to bring Jokic back. This one's tough. Jokic ran out of gas in the second half, and he made some of his shots down the stretch. But in the end of that third quarter, I thought Jokic made some really bad mistakes. Like some bad mistakes in the half court, lazy turnovers and, misreads, different things. And I was thinking, man, Jokic just looks so tired defensively, like no efforts. And I think Malone noticed that in the third quarter and was like, I got to give this guy rest. Second night of a back-to-back. He played 37 minutes the night before. He was sprinting the court in the first quarter and playing really hard. And I just think he ran out of gas, and Malone was like, okay, I got to give him a break. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. In hindsight, you probably win this game if Jokic gets in 30 seconds earlier, maybe a minute earlier, because the second unit did blow. I think it was like a 12-point lead, and it's a 6-point lead when Jokic checks back in. Nonetheless, I cut Malone a lot of slack because that's a tough call. Also, you use a timeout. You would have had to use a timeout to get him in. He went to the scorer's table and the ball didn't stop. You would have had to use a timeout, and Denver was already short on timeout. So everything seems black and white in hindsight, but I actually think it was a tougher call than people realize. I will say this: Jokic checked back into the game. 2 bad possessions in a row. One was a turnover. The other was a Michael Porter Jr. turnover, so it wasn't necessarily his fault. But it was 2 bad plays in a row, and it goes from 6 to 2. And I thought Jokic was a little bit on his heels. Again, maybe that's because he was so tired. He knew he didn't have 6 minutes of energy. He only had 4 or what have you. But the bleeding started with before he got in, and then continued in the first few minutes that he was there. The guy that the Sacramento Kings picked on in the fourth quarter, and the reason that they collapsed down the stretch and got 0 stops, was not Bones Hyland. It was not Jokic, although Jokic had he had one possession where he got blown by Sabonis and Trey Lyles on the same possession. Like, he closed out horribly. Sabonis went right around him. Michael Porter rotated over, and they kicked it to Trey Lyles. Jokic runs out at him, gets blown by him again. So Jokic's defense was really bad in this one, but the guy they targeted in particular was Michael Porter Jr., and we've seen this a handful of times, but he was atrocious last night navigating screens. Brendan Vogt thought that the fall he took in the second quarter, maybe it was the third quarter, maybe that hurt him because he wasn't moving that well. Nonetheless, Jordy did a good job, I thought, of running Jokic and Porter in ball screen actions, but more importantly, putting Porter to chase through screens so that he had to run off of pick and rolls and try to recover. And he is just as slow-footed and slow reaction speed as I've seen in the pick and roll, almost completely negated. And down the stretch, to me, that was the reason Denver didn't get any stops. I know people want to pick on Bones Hyland's defense, which is also bad, but there was a bigger target on the court for the Sacramento Kings in this game, and it was Michael Porter Jr., who, again, I'm not trying to blame this on him. He was the reason they were up big in the first quarter, so this is by no means blaming him. I just want, when you go back and rewatch this game, you see what the other team thinks is their best chance to win. And when you score every possession -2 in a 6-minute stretch, you probably made the right choice. Like, okay, we know where the mark is. So that Jokic-Porter pick-and-roll defense combo is the thing that I think, if you're a Nuggets fan, has to be the scariest part of the season. The bench, whatever. I think Denver's going to figure out the bench, and if they don't, by the end of the season, they probably dump somebody, bring somebody else in, and try to okay, we have to do something. We're not going to lose and waste a year in the playoffs because of this bench. It's also smaller leverage. The bigger thing is Michael Porter is too important to this team to be this bad defensively, and if the Sacramento Kings, who are a good team, can have that level of success, it's like a 180 offensive rating in the clutch last night. I mean, they scored every single time. They got exactly what they wanted. If you can do that against a duo, Porter-Jokic pick and roll, what do you think the Golden State Warriors are going to do? What do you think the Portland Trailblazers are going to do? Or the Dallas Mavericks? Or any team? The worst one is the Phoenix Suns, which, by the way, we've already seen that story, right? We already know how that one goes. If you can put those guys in the pick and roll, by the way, this is what Phoenix did back in the day. They'd put Michael Porter, position him to where he's on ball, then run the Porter-Jokic pick and roll, and it was just the barbecue chicken. The fact that it looked as bad as it ever had in that game, second night of a back-to-back, shorthanded, you could talk yourself into some of these things, but to me, that's the most concerning part. Now, still a good game, still a lot of good positives that came of it, but that part of it to me is the thing. And it was wild to me that so much of the hate was going to Bones after the game because he was not the mark defensively. And I will say this, down the stretch, I thought the Bones made the right read and executed the right read. Sometimes when it was a difficult read to make or a difficult shot to make or finish or whatever, 8 out of 10 times. There were 2 times. He got his pocket picked by Davion Mitchell one time, his only turnover of the game, but it was a big one, and it tied the game. It was a steal, and it went the other way. And then he had another one where he took a 3 and didn't get back on defense. He held the pose for a while and didn't get back, and it was a layup. So those 2 plays to me were the ones where it's and those are killer because they are 4-point wide open layup plays. Outside of that, he made some incredible pocket passes to Jokic, including the last one of the game where Jokic almost hit the little 10-footer, that are not easy passes to make. Most point guards won't make them, especially second-year players, and he made them. So to me, that was the big story out of this one. Agree or disagree? This is just some of the notes that I had from this one from rewatching it. I will say, overall, my mood and thoughts on this game was it was very positive. I thought this was a really good game. Denver was supposed to lose this one given the guys that were out. My hope going into the game was that Jokic would get some confidence for some of the guys that have been struggling, namely Bones Hyland, but some of the other guys. And I think that happened. Porter had a game similar to what Bones had this one a couple games ago, where he started to see the ball go through the hoop, and it has launched him into sort of being back a little bit more offensively, a little bit more confident. My hope is that the same thing happens with Bones Hyland. He's been in a slump. There's no questions asked. Even forget all the stuff that he does bad most of the time. Just the good stuff he does, the scoring, the three-point shooting has been in a rut. My hope is that he's over that well enough so that you can give the reps of him playing so he can start to pick up the defense, or at least have a chance to pick up the defensive aspects of the game that are lacking. So I'm encouraged by this game, and I'm curious what everybody else thinks.